The 450 gallon finally cleared up, just as clear as the other tanks, and I finally figured out what it was. Many of us struggle with a cloudy looking tank, especially when we first set it up. Even though my tank looks like this right now, it used to look like this. And it stayed like that for a long period of time. Long story short, ultimately the cause was an extended bacterial bloom. But I want to share with you guys why this bloom lasted longer than it should have, what I did to correct it once I figured out what the problem was, and what I didn't do, and finally what you should do to prevent this from happening in your next tank setup. Because come on, let's face it, you know you want another tank already. Let's go. Let me start off with a bit of history on this tank. It was set up back in May, so about 5 months ago, and to this day, I've never reached the clarity levels that I have now. I've gone through cloudy water, green water, back to cloudy. It even did clear up a few times, only to revert right back to a cloudy state. Having plants in this tank has really thrown me for a loop as well, because while I know too much light can cause cloudiness problems, the plants themselves need light to survive and thrive. So there's a fine line you have to find to create a balance. And obviously, I'm still looking for that fine line because as you can see, there's a bunch of brown dead plants in the tank. But that's because I recently went away for an extended weekend and I turned off the timers for my lights in the tank like I normally do for all my other tanks, because there's no need for light in the tank when no one's looking at the tanks. The fish don't need any light and they'll do just fine with the natural light that comes into the room. But the plants do need light. So I didn't think it all the way through. The plants stayed without any light. Long story short, I lost some plants. But it's okay because they're gonna regrow, and if they don't, I'll just replant them with some new ones. In a way, I'm kind of glad that the plants died right before making this video, because it shows even more how clear the tank water is, even with all that dead organic material in the tank. It shows that now that bacterial bloom is completely gone. The green water issue was definitely algae bloom, and that had a lot to do with me finding the balance with the light as well. But that was easily fixed by just adjusting the time that the lights stay on in the tank. But that haze, that cloudiness remained. And because it remained for so long, I started to think that maybe it wasn't a bacterial bloom issue. Maybe it was just excess particles in the water. So I tried every single trick that I have in my crystal clear water book. I put it to the test, but still that cloudiness remained. I decreased the micron size of my sump socks from 200 microns to 100 microns in order to catch and trap the tiniest of particles. That didn't help. I added more mechanical media to the sump after water passed the socks. That didn't help. I went the chemical media route and tried both Cichlid Purigen and ChemiPure Blue. Still, no change. The one thing I didn't even bother to try, which a couple of people have suggested to me, was to install a UV light. Now, while this might have helped, and the key word here is might, I have never had the need to install a UV light in any of my freshwater tanks in order to get crystal clear water, and I wasn't about to start now. I was determined to figure this out without having to add any unnecessary equipment. And when I say unnecessary, I mean it's unnecessary for me, because I know exactly how to keep my tanks crystal clear without needing a UV light. Some of you do need a UV light to get that clarity that you want out of your tanks, and that's okay. But I didn't want to add any equipment that I know I didn't need to use in the past. So I start thinking about my feeding amounts. My feeding is in check. I start thinking about the cleanliness of the tank. I know that the tank is clean. So I decide to do a couple water changes to try to clear up that haze. Something that you should not do when your tank is currently in a bacterial bloom. I'll tell you more about that in a second. So you can probably guess what happened after that water change. Cloudiness all over again. Even worse than before, which made it crystal clear to me that this was absolutely a bacterial bloom issue going on in the tank. The reason is because tap water contains dissolved organics which feed the cloud-causing bacteria in your tank. And if your tank is young, immature, and it doesn't have an established beneficial bacteria colony to fight off that cloud-causing bacteria, then you're going to get a bacterial bloom every time that you water change. Sometimes just a mini bloom, but it happens. And that's why you shouldn't water change when you're going through a bacterial bloom. More info on that in that video right there. So now I had to pivot and change my thought process into why I was still going through a bacterial bloom after all this time. So because bacterial bloom is due to a lack of beneficial bacteria in your tank, I had to think what would prevent the growth of new beneficial bacteria. Number one, we need time, and I had plenty of that, so that wasn't an issue. Number two, they need a food source, which is ammonia and nitrite. This tank has been cycled for months, so they have successfully been converting all of the ammonia and all of the nitrite. So food wasn't an issue. They also need oxygen. I've got a ton of surface agitation coming from my sump outputs, as well as my wave makers, and the water is being oxygenated as it splashes into my sump. So oxygen isn't a problem. They also need surface area, which I've got in the bag because I've loaded up the sump with Chem Matrix. It's an absolutely great biomedia, proven to work time and time again. It's all that I use in any of my other tanks, so I know there is plenty of surface area for bacteria to grow on, as well as the surfaces of the tank itself. So what else is there? What else can it be? Do you have any idea? Do you know what else could be causing an insufficient amount of beneficial bacteria in the tank, causing a bacterial bloom to last for over 5 months? If you do, leave a comment below right now. Do it right now. Don't cheat. Don't wait till I give you the answer. I have a way of telling when you leave a comment while a video is playing. Not really, just kidding, but come on, integrity people, all right? There's only one last thing, and it's something that not too many people talk about in this hobby when cycling your tank, and that is your water's pH levels. Beneficial bacteria cannot grow, or at the very least have a very hard time reproducing in pH levels under 6.0. If you've ever heard of a tank crashing, it's usually because pH levels got drastically low, which killed all the beneficial bacteria in the tank, causing ammonia spikes in the tank, which ultimately end up with a tank full of dead fish. So lo and behold, I was beginning to notice the pH levels dropping in the tank from my Chem pH alert tab. When the color on the tab finally changed enough for me to actually test the pH, what do you know? It was lower than the lowest test result. It was under 6.0. Now, how did my pH get to such dangerously low levels? I'm not entirely sure. The background is not real wood, so it does not release pH dropping tannins into the water. Maybe it was the adhesive that I used to secure the background to the tank. Maybe it was all the plants that were added in the tank. Maybe it was the nitrogen cycle itself. As your nitrates rise, your pH can drop in the tank. The nitrogen cycle itself, the conversion of ammonia to nitrite and nitrite to nitrate, is also a pH dropping process, especially if you don't use any buffers in the tank to keep the pH stable, which in this tank's case, I did not. This 450 never got any buffer, similar to my American Cichlid 150 right there, never had the need for any buffer. The only difference is that the 450 was going through the cycling process. So it was more likely that the nitrogen process was contributing to the drop in pH. So yes, I slacked and I wasn't testing pH along with all the other parameters that I was testing consistently every day. Luckily for the Chem alert, it gave me an idea the pH was off. Now, had I been testing all of my parameters and keeping track of them in the AquaBuilder app, I might have been able to avoid this from happening. This app is a game changer. The team and I have been working hard every day to create new features, release new species of fish, fix whatever bugs came out in the initial launch. We'll be rolling out updates on the regular to make sure that this is the best aquarium app we've ever had. You can download it right now for free right here or in the description below. So how did I fix the problem? I added buffer. Now, Chem makes Malawi buffer and neutral regulator, both of which will raise your pH, but neither of which would work really well in this specific tank. One, these fish aren't Malawi fish, and two, both of those buffers are phosphate-based buffers, which is something you don't want to add more of in a tank with live plants. Having plants in the tank and having to balance the light to help fight the algae and keep it away, you don't want to add any more phosphate into the tank because that will also contribute to algae growth. Luckily, Chem still got you. They also make alkaline buffer, which is great for raising the pH in planet tanks because this is not phosphate based. So I added about half the recommended amount week 1, then the second half week 2, because I didn't want the pH to swing too quickly and cause harm to the fish. But once the pH reached around neutral, about 7.0, the tank started to clear up every single day until it finally reached crystal clear water. If you didn't want to use buffers, there's another option too. You could use crushed coral inside your filters. This will also help to raise your pH, but you gotta be careful with crushed coral because it might raise your pH too high, and you don't want that to happen in a tank full of fish that don't do well in high pH waters. For example, discus, they're not going to enjoy a high pH. Moral of the story, pH is something you must be aware of while going through bacterial blooms and cycling your tank. Even in the tank where you think you don't have to worry about pH at all. because all your other tanks are doing fine in your source water. Keep track of your pH. Now, if you do keep fish that thrive in high pH water, like these African cichlids right here, then you're gonna wanna watch this video right here, which is gonna be super helpful for you. And if you're a beginner in the hobby, that's the playlist for you right there. Before you go, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the other side.